We live in a rainbow of chaos, Paul Cezanne.
Well, if you think about the definition of capitalism is making more and more goods at better and better efficiency and productivity. So therefore, capitalism is falling prices. If I'm making more of it with better productivity, it's just a lifetime of falling prices. And in fact, that's the history of the last 400 years of early capitalism and more recently capitalism as we know it. But so falling prices interrupted by periods of war. So the only way to truly destroy supply and demand is war. Go out there and bury 100,000 people and 100,000 tanks, and you've destroyed the supply side. You've destroyed a lot of the demand side. You will get inflation. So, in other words, capitalism is falling prices interrupted by periods of war. And what are we getting right now? We're getting the COVID war. We're getting the Cold War. We're getting potentially a hot war in Ukraine. So this cycle is no different than what we've experienced in the last 200 years.
It may not seem like this, but this is one of the most peaceful times in history. War creates disruptions on both the supply and demand side by reallocating resources towards the war. These disruptions create volatility in consumer goods. You pair this with the epic amount of money printing, what will happen? This is a chart of peace and war overlaid on CPI. Look at the correlation.
Today, the 8 richest human beings in the world, 8 individuals, their combined wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on Earth. That's 3.5 billion people. There's something very dysfunctional about the way we're organizing the economic life of the human family. It's clear that we have a dysfunctional approach to our economic future.
We are in a trend of centralization of top-down systems falling apart and being rebuilt. The dysfunction of this system is more apparent than ever. In the short term, we will see a hybrid approach of centralized, decentralized systems in order to restore confidence.
Yeah, they can do, good point, they can do absolutely nothing about the supply side. In fact, perhaps make the supply side only worse. The supply side, given time, will respond, but if they move too quickly on the demand destruction. And interesting in this cycle, well, actually in most cycles, the market's doing that destruction for them, right? We've taken down $3.5 trillion worth of value in the stock market. We've taken down another $1 trillion in the crypto market. Remember, this is $4.5 trillion, which was represented demand for cars and planes and boats and gasoline. So the market's kind of doing the lifting for the Fed, and I think that's very much by design.
If you were to think back over the years,
demand destruction is just a fancy word for a recession or a depression. We constantly hear this coming out of Yellen's mouth or Powell's mouth, and that's what they're saying, is they're going to cause a recession or a depression so you can't afford to buy anything, and therefore they shrunk demand.
And the other thing you have is a supply-demand imbalance that can trigger inflation. And that's what happened in the 70s. We had a supply disruption in oil, prices went up, and you started to see some inflation. And then you had the problem that Volcker gets credit for, but when you actually, again, look at the data, you kind of like, wait a second, this is not a good thing. So the way they measured CPI included mortgage prices, interest rates, and house prices. So as house prices started to go up, as more boomers, my cohort, started to buy houses, then interest rates started to rise. So he decided, I'm going to raise interest rates. Well, but it fed into the CPI. So every time he raised rates, the CPI went up, which meant he thought he had to raise more. And it was this cascading effect until, quote unquote, he broke the back of inflation when rates were 20%. And all he did is plunge us into a back-to-back recession in 81 and 83. And people are like, well, that's a good thing somehow. So that's the first thing that isn't the same. Second is demographically today, we don't have demand pull inflation.
Right.
The aging population is downsizing, spending less. The echo boomers.
Central bankers are scientists that experiment on us. They don't really know with certainty what will happen. They have a process of trial and error. Kristalina Georgieva has even admitted this.
I think we are not paying sufficient attention to the law of unintended consequences. We take decisions with an objective in mind and really think through what may happen that is not our objective. And then we wrestle with the impact of it.
That second industrial revolution peaked. We know the date. It peaked in 2008 when Brent crude oil hit a record price of $147 on world markets. And when that happened in July of 2008, the entire global economy shut down. That was the great economic earthquake of the 200-year history of the fossil fuel industrial revolution. The collapse of the financial market with the subprime mortgages a month later was an aftershock, because that was a Ponzi scheme, a fictional economy. Why was the 147 benchmark for oil the beginning of the long sunset for the industrial age? Everything in the industrial era depends on oil, fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. Our food additives and preservatives, our pharmaceutical products, our construction materials, our heating, our transportation, our food products, they all depend on fossil fuels. So when the price of fossil fuels goes over 80 a barrel, watch all the other prices going up. And what happened in 2008 is when oil hit 147 a barrel, purchasing power stopped because everything we were buying, using, was based on a high price of fossil fuels. If this sounds familiar, this is what's going on right now, one more time. That is, we're seeing the price of Brent crude oil now, as I speak to you today, $119 a barrel. And I believe it's Goldman Sachs that predicted just this week, it's going up to 140 a barrel. This is a surge in a death throw of rising prices for fossil fuels and then collapse, rising prices, then collapse. It's clear that the age of fossil fuels is not sun rising, it's sun setting. And then the question from here is, where do we go? How do we chart a new direction? Let me share an anecdote with you. When Chancellor Merkel became Chancellor of Germany,
When I introduce a concept on this channel, that does not mean that I agree with it. I'm introducing ideas so we are aware of trends. Jeremy Rifkin is an economist and social philosopher. He's had influence in Europe and has persuaded Germany to move away from fossil fuels to create smart cities. His company, TR Consulting Groups, works with cities, regions, and national governments to develop the Internet of Things infrastructure for the Third Industrial Revolution. This is a photo of him with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. His lectures are based on the theory of a third industrial revolution. Does that sound familiar? Klaus Schwab's fourth industrial revolution is an adaptation of Jeremy's vision. Jeremy's vision is a concept of smart cities, self-sufficient circular economies that are localized. It's the idea of decentralizations, but for communities at large. Self-sustaining local economies interacting globally through the Internet of Energy, the Internet of Things. One aspect of these cities is to have micro-energy production through solar and wind. When there is a surplus of energy, they are able to sell the surplus to neighboring cities. All of this would be automated and efficiently managed through AI. For systems to take place, there needs to be an array of blockchains for security, data, and microeconomies. Oil spiked in 2008 and it broke the back of the economy. Price became higher and businesses had less capital to expand because energy costs were so high. This caused the contraction. Today, energy prices are moving up when we can already see the narrative taking place. The Inflation Reduction Act is an act focused on green energy.
Okay, but based on what? Well, inflation is caused by Putin. Like, what are you talking about? Oil prices went up way before Putin invaded. In fact, I think today oil prices are lower than when Putin invaded. I think that's true.
Okay.
It's within a couple bucks. So it ain't about Putin. It's about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, in the middle of the lockdowns, bought up all the storage in Houston and flooded the market. Remember, we went to negative oil prices only for a couple days in April of 2020. That had nothing to do with Putin. That actually had nothing to do with money printing. That had to do with an opportunistic entity with lots of liquidity, pun intended, flooding the market. And then what did they do? They went out and bought stakes in Shell and BP and other companies that were down 80%. They bought a piece of a cruise line. I would argue that's market manipulation. Now, it's not illegal, I guess, because it's not insider trading, but it's clearly manipulation of the market. To me, it's no different than spoofing gold, and JP Morgan just had to pay $962 million for that. But if you're part of the cabal and you're part of the power structure, then you can do that stuff.
Mark states that Russia did not have anything to do with oil, but this is not true. Russia backed out of OPEC in 2020, and that started the chain of events in which oil futures went negative, allowing the entity to position itself. What is the end goal? It is to move away from fossil fuels and to move to a green economy.
When you destroy economies that we've been living with for thousands of years, makes no sense. But maybe it does make sense if your goal is different than defeating the virus. Maybe it's not about the virus. Maybe it's about control. Maybe it's about money. Maybe it's about power. Maybe it's about dictatorships. More on that later. So,
for too long, humanity has existed within dysfunctional and polluted cities that ignore nature. Now, a revolution in civilization is taking place. Imagine a traditional city and consolidating its footprint, designing to protect and enhance nature. The line will be home to 9 million residents and will be built with a footprint of just 34 square kilometers. And we are designing it to provide a healthier, more sustainable quality of life. The line's communities are organized in 3 dimensions. Residents have access to all their daily needs within 5-minute walk neighborhoods. And the line's infrastructure makes it possible to travel end-to-end in 20 minutes with no need for cars, resulting in 0 carbon emissions. By leveraging AI technology, services are autonomous, saving you time and effort. Designed by world-leading architects, the line is 500 meters tall, 200 meters wide, 170 kilometers long, and housed within an elegant mirror glass facade. Intelligent solutions create efficiency and year-round temperate microclimate with natural ventilation. Energy and water supplies are 100% renewable. The line is designed as a series of unique communities, offering a wealth of amenities, providing equitable views and immediate access to the surrounding nature. With 40% of the world accessible within 6 hours, at the heart of the globe's key trade routes, a place for commerce and communities to thrive like nothing on Earth seen before. The line, the city that delivers new wonders for the world.
This is Saudi Arabia's presentation on a futuristic city called The Line. It is part of Vision 2030. As I've mentioned previously, these smart cities are enabled by blockchain technologies. The criticisms of this project stem from digital identity and facial recognition that will completely rid all citizens of the city with very little to no privacy.
Across a civilization, 3 new technology revolutions emerged and converged to create what we call in industry a infrastructure that fundamentally transforms the way our society communicates, powers, and moves its economic life, its social life, its governance. What are those 3 technology revolutions? Number 1, new communication revolutions. Number 2, new energy regimes. Number 3, new modes of transportation and logistics. So when new communication revolutions converge with new energy regimes, which in turn converge with new mobility and logistics, it establishes an infrastructure that brings larger numbers of people together in more diverse relationships, annihilating time and space so that we can begin to behave as a social organism in time and space.
The awareness of our own strength makes us modest. Paul Cézanne. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy work like this and wish to support my channel, please consider joining my Patreon, where all videos are ad-free. Discord access and weekly Zoom chats where we discuss the macro environment as well as other projects.